all linked to the Phala Phala saga. Advocates for Transformation, they've come out in defense of Advocate Mahlape Sello, that's the senior counsel, amid allegations of improper conduct. Now, the critics say Sello should not have become a member of the Phala Phala panel because she previously acted for suspended ANC Secretary General ACE Magashule, the Section 89 panel, finding that President Ramaphosa may have violated the constitution in relation to the robbery at his Limpopo farm back in 2020. Let's get some reaction now, and we'll speak to the chairperson of the Advocates for Transformation, Tembeka Ngcukaitobi. Mr. Ngcukaitobi, thank you very much for your time. It's a very straightforward question. Was it perfectly legitimate for Advocate Sello to accept the brief from the Speaker of the National Assembly, Newzroom Afrika, to do this job?
Yes, the answer is yes. She acted properly by accepting the brief. We say so for three reasons. The first is that she was acting on brief from an attorney, as we understand, on the mandate of the Speaker. Now, when an advocate accepts a brief, she accepts the brief to act independently, without fear, without favor. Secondly, we are not aware of any facts that came from the Mr. ACE Magashule litigation that would have disqualified or disabled Advocate Sello from acting as a member of the panel. And thirdly, the matter was public. The appointment of Advocate Sello was public. We are not aware of any objection raised at the time of her appointment that perhaps there would be a perception of bias against President Ramaphosa. And indeed, we are not aware of any actual or perceived complaints right now in the light of the report that they have produced, that somehow the report is influenced by Advocate Sello's involvement in the litigation against President Ramaphosa on instructions by Mr. Magashule. So from our assessment, we think that the imputation, certainly the innuendo, is grossly unfair. We think that she acted legitimately as an independent advocate.
Yeah. Let's deal with that perception of bias that you speak about against the president. And you say that lawyers ought to execute their duties without any fear or favor. There are those, though, who are intent on rubbishing her, whether it be via social media or any other platforms, to say, if she acted for ACE Magashule not so long ago, what would you have expected the final outcome of a matter that involves the president, where ACE Magashule stands diametrically opposed to, at least politically? How do you deal with that perception?
Well, it's based on ignorance, perhaps mischief, or a combination. When an advocate takes a brief from a client, the advocate does not assume the political identity of their client, nor do they assume the commercial interest of a client. They are always independent from the client. So a client may be opposed to President Ramaphosa politically, but the advocate does not themselves become opposed to President Ramaphosa politically, because what they are engaged in is a mere discharge of a brief. Once the brief has been discharged, and we understand the case of ACE Magashule actually to have been finalized, an application for leave to appeal to the Constitutional Court was dismissed. So at the time at which Advocate Sello accepted the brief to sit on the panel, even that litigation was finalized. So the first problem with that accusation is that it assumes that the advocate is indistinguishable from their client, and that is utterly fallacious. But the second problem is that that criticism does not produce any facts or evidence that anything transpired or happened in the case of ACE Magashule that has a bearing in the case of President Ramaphosa. I admit that there are instances where the involvement of an advocate in one case enables them to gain insights of a particular way of thinking or approach that may then cause embarrassment. But that's all a factual analysis. Advocates speak to many clients about many things, but until they are on brief for those clients, there is no conflict of interest. So even that assumption that because Mr. Magashule is politically diametrically opposed to Mr. Ramaphosa, therefore the advocate is also biased against the president, is born out of mischief.
Yeah. In the event, Advocate Ngcukaitobi, that these perceptions become stronger, and I'm saying this on the back of the president in signaling the intention to challenge the outcome of this report. Just a little earlier, I had a conversation with a professor of politics, who seems to suggest that this report, it based its outcomes on hearsay, and although he did not, and I will stand by this, he did not say anything against the competence, professional competence of the people involved here, nor their intentions, except to say that perhaps there was a limited scope within which they could conduct their work. What will the approach of the Advocates for Transformation be in the event that these perceptions and the attacks become stronger and louder against Advocate Sello?
Yes, I mean, we hope that the public, and specifically the media, because I did see an article in the Daily Maverick which did not suggest bias, but certainly left the innuendo, because its own heading seeks to place a question mark, and they interviewed her, it seems, Advocate Sello, and her response was, well, you didn't ask the question at the time. So what we hope as the AFT would happen is that by clarifying the role of advocates and the importance of that role and the need for society not to link advocates with the causes of their clients, the public will understand that there was no conflict of interest and that perhaps the story will disappear. But that may not happen because we live in South Africa. These things tend to generate a life of their own. We do not see that there can be any basis to suggest bias or perception of bias, in law at least. So our major problem is not a legal problem, because there is clearly no legal basis for anyone to suggest that Advocate Sello was somehow biased against the president. Our problem is a deeper one. We are worried about the rule of law in society. Why are we worried about the rule of law in society? Advocates occupy a branch of society which enables ordinary people, regardless of their social standing, regardless of their political beliefs, to have access to the legal system. But if the advocates are attacked personally and their integrity is questioned on frivolous and spurious grounds like this, that would tend to detract from their ability to take on unpopular causes. What we would like to see as the AFT is that advocates would be able to take unpopular causes, whether they are political causes or social causes or economic causes, and channel them for resolution through the legal system. What we don't want is people to resort to self-help when there are disputes in society. But if you intimidate the lawyers through social media, and if you intimidate the lawyers by making innuendo in official newspapers, the problem is that it's society that ultimately suffers, because it implicates what we call the cab rank rule, where each advocate is obliged to take a case whether they like the client, provided that they are available, provided that the fee is a reasonable fee.
Yeah.
So that is our major concern, is we want to start the debate that begins to understand the role of an advocate as an independent practitioner who is central to the maintenance of the rule of law.
Advocate, very briefly, I know that you have an engagement at 10. How did you deal with this? Because this was once you, when you acted for the State Capture Commission of Inquiry in its trials and tribulations against the former president.
Yes, I know the feeling quite well. I can imagine what Advocate Sello is going through. I know the mischief of social media well, and I know the mischief that is also peddled by the political opponents of the client that you are representing. And what they do, instead of attacking the merits of the argument, they invert the attack to the person. They start attacking the lawyer. And we see here the beginning signs of that, where people don't like, maybe they don't like, the outcome. No one should like the outcome. If they don't like the outcome, they should challenge it in court. That is why we have courts. But what they do is that instead of attacking the outcome on the merits, they turn the attack to the individual. Now, this is an unfortunate feature of the current situation. Now, you ask me a personal question or maybe a professional question rather than personal. How did I deal with it? I must admit that when it happens right at the time at which the attacks are unfolding, it is an extremely difficult thing, because you do question whether or not you made the right calls. And perhaps by speaking to colleagues, by speaking to friends, you regain your strength to press ahead. So there is something inside an advocate that requires resilience in circumstances where there is an attack. But I was also defended by my profession. I was defended by the Black Lawyers Association, by NADEL, by the General Counsel of the Bar, and I think also by the then Advocates for Transformation.
Yeah.
So yes, it's true that we try to defend advocates, but we do so because we want to defend the institution of the rule of law.
Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi, let me thank you very much for your time, Chairperson of the Advocates for Transformation. That takes